So great to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So talk to me about what exactly your company does.
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of a company called Patch.
Okay.
At Patch, our core objective is to scale carbon dioxide removal with software.
Okay.
Carbon dioxide removal is a core ingredient to fighting climate change. So when you think about mitigating the climate crisis, there's two core levers we have to pull. The first is decarbonizing. That looks like rolling out renewable electricity, electrifying vehicles. But then the second piece is removing carbon from the atmosphere. We've been polluting for the last 150 years, and we actually have to undo some of that pollution in addition to preventing further pollution in order to hit our climate goals.
Very cool. Now, how did you get the idea for this? Walk me through your founding story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I initially studied chemical engineering at McGill with the intention of working in low carbon energy. That's how I thought I was going to fight the climate crisis. It didn't work out. I only got jobs in oil and gas coming out of school. And so instead of doing that, I worked at a wide variety of tech startups for around 8 or 9 years. And then back in April of 2020, me and my co-founder, Aaron Grunfeld, really wanted to start something of our own. And so what we did was we looked at what are the 8 or 9 things that need to be true in order for us to hit our climate goals, going back to those solutions I mentioned earlier, so renewable energy, agriculture, and carbon dioxide removal was one of those elements where it felt like there was no infrastructure to get it off the ground, and we had very little existing capacity back in 2020. We weren't even doing 1/1000th of the amount of carbon dioxide removal we need to be doing. And so we decided to focus on that area and understand how we could apply the software skills we had learned in past companies we had worked at before and apply it to carbon dioxide removal.
Very cool. Were the other startups that you worked in the energy and climate space as well, or is this a change for you?
It's a total change.
Okay.
So I used to work at a company called Shopify. It's an e-commerce
yeah.
platform to help e-commerce merchants launch and scale their business.
Right.
And then a company called Sonder, which is a tech-enabled hotel, essentially. But what that taught me was at Shopify was all about building these vertical platforms to help sellers scale their business. That actually maps really similarly to carbon dioxide removal developers, the people selling that carbon removal capacity.
Yeah.
And then at Sonder, we were listing on a variety of marketplaces, whether that's Booking.com, Airbnb. And so that marketplace understanding actually mapped really well to some of the problems we were facing within carbon markets.
Interesting. So say I'm a company or a consumer of your platform. Walk me through like the experience and how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, we only work with corporates. And so what will happen is you'll make some sort of net zero strategy. So understanding how am I going to get from a polluting company to a company where I have no environmental impact.
Okay.
And there's going to be a few elements to that, but it's going to be primarily focused on 3 core steps. Understanding what the footprint is, creating a path to decarbonize, so reducing the emissions, and then actually compensating for the remaining emissions to get to that net in net zero. And that net piece is the part that Patch actually helps with, where we give a wide variety of buyers access to a wide variety of carbon dioxide removal solutions, whether that's nature-based solutions or even something like direct air capture, which are these big fans that suck CO2 out of the air.
Very cool. So I feel like I've been hearing about this more and more recently. Of course, climate change is top of mind for everyone. So there seems like there's a lot of other companies out there who are doing similar things, maybe not exactly how you're doing it. Talk to me about your competitors and how you're setting yourself apart.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way to think about Patch and what kind of makes us special is we view our core customer not as the buyer of carbon dioxide removal, but as the seller of the capacity. Because those are the folks really doing the work on the ground and trying to understand how are we going to actually deploy reforestation technology or direct air carbon capture or all of these other technologies. They're the ones doing the chemical engineering and operations on the ground. And so one of the first things when we worked with those folks, they told us was, we need sales. So we launched that marketplace product to understand, okay, how do we get more buyers to come to buy from these folks? But then the second piece was, okay, now we have all these sales, but our business is complicated. There's all this information complexity. I don't know how to do foreign exchange or payments. And so then we launched a product called Carbon OS, which is that kind of Shopify-esque platform, that vertical SaaS platform for suppliers. So the thing that really differentiates Patch is we're really for the suppliers all the time, regardless of what the buyers actually need.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
Now talk to me about your fundraising journey. How's that been for you?
Yeah, thankfully it's gotten easier and easier. You know, the first round, we raised around $4.5 million from Andreessen, but that took a really long time. That was during COVID as well, from I guess that was June or July of 2020. So big kind of drawn out experience.
Yeah.
But we've been fortunate enough to raise from a really wide variety of folks, including Andreessen, Coatue, and Energize, and have raised around $80 million to date. So really thankful to be really well capitalized, particularly in this more economic uncertain time.
Yeah.
So we're just heads down, focused on building and doing what's best for carbon markets as a whole.
Nice. What has fundraising afforded you and your company?
Primarily affording the best talent. So climate tech companies as a whole actually have this advantage because apart from maybe AI, it's a highly desirable ecosystem for tech workers to work within, right? People really want to find a way to apply these software skills and technology skills to a mission that really excites them. And climate change is one of those kind of top 2-3 missions that most folks, particularly in the Bay Area, London, New York, really think about. And so for us, it's really primarily afforded us to hire the best people we can possibly find. And we're fortunate enough to have a huge top of funnel because a lot of people want to work in climate and put their 40, 60 hours a week towards actually a mission that's a little bit bigger than themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to get some sort of a sense of scale of your company. Can you talk to me a bit about how many users you have or anything like that that'll show me your size?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the buyer side of the equation, we work with around 400 corporates, companies as large as EQT or Bain & Company to as small as startups you haven't heard of before. And then on the supply side, we work with around 100 or so carbon credit developers at various stages of scale as well. Some doing a couple 100,000 tons a year, others doing tens of millions or hundreds of millions of tons a year. So we have around 400 million tons under management in the Patch platform holistically.
That's really cool. Now, a thing I hear a lot, especially from founders in the social impact space, is that it's really hard to balance doing good for the world with running a profitable business. How do those things compete, I guess, in your mind, and how do you look at it in how you run your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a really big believer that markets are kind of what got us into this problem, as well as what's going to drive us out of this problem. So if you find a way to align incentives and market-based dynamics with the specific outcome you want, you're going to have a lot of really good results.
Yeah.
And so for us, what we've seen is there's more and more pressure, whether it's from consumers, regulators, or investors on corporates to get their climate strategy in shape. And so for us, thankfully, we've been able to really give these folks a kind of extend an arm to these folks and help them kind of operationalize some of their carbon strategy. And so it's actually the ROI for the business is actually quite clear. And so many times we don't really feel this tension of doing what's good for the world or what's good for business, because a lot of these businesses are coming to us asking us, how do I do this thing? And we kind of serve it to them on a silver platter. Hey, these are the 3 steps you should do, and we make it really easy for them.
What would you say is the most challenging part of running your business?
It's a great question. I think particularly within carbon markets, it's actually understanding all the moving parts within the ecosystem. So carbon markets globally, if you include voluntary and compliance carbon markets, are around 900 billion globally. But just within voluntary carbon, what we're focusing on is actually only 3 or 4 billion a year. But it's growing really quickly. And so as a result, there are new standards, new buyers, new sellers, new rule sets that are emerging. And so we have to be incredibly reactive. And it creates a huge amount of noise. And so trying to understand, well, what's here to stay? And what's maybe a passing fad or maybe something that doesn't really have longevity does take a lot of effort.
That makes sense. And unfortunately, I feel like climate change is just so politicized right now.
Yeah.
What's your experience been like running a startup in kind of a politically fractured industry?
Yeah, the policy world is actually very new to me. I'm coming from kind of engineering and then tech, and so I'm spending way more time in DC than I initially thought I would have been. I think the biggest thing to understand is you have to think of these problems in terms of systems. And everyone has a slightly different priority set. And, you can bucket it as right or the left in the US, but the reality of the situation is all these kind of global systems, whether it's kind of climate change, energy, food systems, economic development or job creation, are all interlinked. And so in a lot of cases, it's all about just reframing a particular problem so that people are excited. So a great example is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is the biggest climate change bill ever passed in North American history. And what got it over the ledge was, in many cases, the job creation element, right? How do we create great American paying jobs that catalyze kind of climate solutions so kind of the right, in a lot of cases, get what they need, where they really want to have economic development and maybe in some cases kind of more economic growth.
Right.
But on the left's case, they actually get the climate change solutions they want.
So all about the compromise.
It's all about finding that win-win in a lot of cases.
Right.
What's the kind of 1 + 1 = 3?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Is there ever a world in which you could envision selling your company? And if so, what would that take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not going to sit up here and say there's a price for everything. But as far as we're concerned, carbon markets as a whole are going to be around $100 billion market in 2030, and environmental markets holistically are going to be trillions of dollars by that time. So for us, kind of through our current lens, we kind of view ourselves kind of going the distance and becoming a public independent business. That being said, if we feel like we can amplify our scale and our impact faster through some sort of acquisitive motion, I wouldn't, you always have to entertain the conversation, but as far as we're concerned, we're kind of focused on going the distance.
Nice. Is there any advice that you would give your younger self that you wish you knew on like day one of your company that you wish you know now?
Yeah, I think particularly with new ecosystems, I would actually really encourage folks not to assume that the experts know that much more than you actually do. So, we're a 3.5-year-old business, and in 3.5 years, we've kind of positioned ourselves to be on the bleeding edge of how environmental markets are going to work, where we're working with governments in the US, the UK, working with some of the largest companies in the world. But 3.5 years ago, it was just me and my co-founder eating pasta in my one-bedroom apartment. And so, of course, that took a huge amount of effort, and it's, 70, 80, 90-hour weeks, but that amount of effort, even just after 3 years, is still not that much time. And so I wouldn't kind of doubt oneself if you're concerned that there's a huge gap between what you know today and what you actually need to know. Just kind of get started and understand where are the soft spots and how can you create value.
Very cool. So what's next for you? Tell me about what's coming up in 2024, what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, honestly, just adding zeros to what we've been doing, right? So, we talked about the idea of having 400 million tons under management. I hope, next time we chat, I hope it's kind of closer to $1 billion or more.
Fingers crossed.
And similar on the supply or the buy side, where we want to continue to scale these markets. Again, these markets are really small still. They're only a couple billion dollars per year.
Yeah.
And we need to make that bigger. So for us, we kind of have a winning strategy already. So we just have to do more of it and not get in our own way.
And finally, what would you like your legacy to be?
Yeah. So when I think about my legacy or patch generally, I think the biggest thing is just putting a dent in climate change.
Yeah.
We need to be removing around 10 to 15 gigatons per year by 2050.
Yeah.
And if we can be doing, 5, 10, 15% and actually attribute that to what patch is doing, I think that's really exciting.
That would be amazing. Well, fingers crossed that you accomplish that goal.
Got a lot of work. Got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Brennan.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.